At the height of 18th century, a revolutionary movement arose that shook France between 1787 to 1799. During this period, French citizens raised and redesigned their country's political landscape, uprooting centuries-old institutions such as absolute monarchy and the feudal system. The French Revolution was influenced by Enlightenment ideas, particularly the concepts of popular sovereignty and inalienable rights. The revolution overthrew the monarchy, established a republic, and experienced violent periods of economic and political upheaval. Inspired by liberal and radical ideas, the revolution profoundly altered the course of modern history, triggering the global decline of absolute monarchies while replacing them with democratic government. However, France during this period was suffering from a social, economic, and political crisis. The price of bread was rising and protests were becoming more common. The anger focused upon the aristocracy, who however fought against yielding their power or money. These continuous conflicts had set the stage for the French Revolution to occur. There are numerous causes that led to this revolutionary movement, including the spread of Enlightenment ideas, specifically the concept of equality and justice, economic crises such as the bankruptcy of the government, the inequalities among social classes regarding people's fundamental rights, and lastly political issues challenging the idea of absolute monarchy. Of all the countries in Europe, France was one of the region that is deeply affected by social inequalities and the arbitrary rule of the Sun King Louis XVI. He ruled by the divine right theory, which held that he had received his power to govern from God. His power was absolute. He appointed all civil officials and military forces. He made and enforced laws. He could declare war and make peace. He imposed taxes and spent the people's money. He lived in his magnificent palace at Versailles, with his wife Marie Antoinette, often throwing lavish party. During his reign, France was formally divided into three legal categories known as estates. Included in the first estate were members of the clergy. It made up 1% of the population and owned 10% of land. The second estate was made up of the nobility. It took up 1% of France's population and owned 25% of land. The nearly 98% of the population was in the third estate, which were the merchants, peasants, city workers, manufacturers, lawyers, doctors, and professors. Members of the first and second estates enjoyed enormous wealth and privilege among them, which includes the immunity from taxation, a monopoly over offices, and entitlements of various pensions, all of which had the effect of placing a great burden on the third estate to support the monarchy and clergy. From rich to poor, members of the third estate resented the privileges enjoyed by the elite wealthy officials. Peasants were burdened by taxes on everything, from land to products. In towns and cities, Enlightenment ideas led people to question inequalities of the social system. Why, people demanded, should the first two estates have such privileges at the expense of the majority? Economic crisis added to the social unrest and heightened tensions in France. One of the causes of the economic troubles was the financial crisis due to deficit spending, which occurs when a government spends more money than it takes in. The French monarchy had become completely immoral and corrupt during the reign of Louis XVI. There was a lot of discontentment and dejection in France due to the evil deeds of the king. Louis XVI and the Queen spent a lot on their luxuries. He was greatly influenced by his queen, who herself was a spendthrift lady with no love for the country. He failed to bring about reform due to her evil influence, which later on led for the revolution to flare up. In addition, France's subsequent ruler Louis XIV left the French state racked with massive debt. The 7 Years' War, the American Revolution, The building of the Versailles and the extravagant spending of Louis XVI and his wife Antoinette strained the treasury even further. To bridge the gap between income and expenses, the government borrowed more and more money. Not only were the royal coffers depleted, but 2 decades of poor cereal harvests, drought, cattle disease, and skyrocketing bread prices had kindled unrest among peasants and the urban poor. Many expressed their desperation and resentment toward the officials who imposed heavy taxes. Their hunger turned to rage. Bread riots break out across France. Bakeries were raided and shopkeepers suspected of hoarding bread were executed on the spot. Hoping to solve the problems, the king appointed Jacques Necker as an advisor. He was a famous financial expert. Necker urged the king to reduce extravagant court spending, reform government, and abolish burdensome tariffs on internal trade. When Necker proposed taxing the first and second estates, however, the nobles and high clergy forced the king to dismiss him. They fiercely resisted any attempt to end their exemption from taxes. By 1789, the situation was deteriorating rapidly. In May of that year, to address the fiscal crisis, Louis XVI convened the Estates General, an advisory assembly of different estates or socio-economic classes. However, there was a lot of conflict within the Third Estate because it was made up of everyone who was not part of the royal family, clergy, or nobility. The Third Estate was very unsatisfied because although it contained over 90% of the population, it still had the same 1 vote as the other 2 estates with fewer people. Their concerns had later on led to various political issues. In preparation for the meeting, the Third Estate prepared the Cahiers, a notebook with the lists of their complaints. Their grievances was mainly about reforms such as fairer taxes, freedom of the press, and equal representation in the government. The representatives held a meeting on a nearby tennis court in which they denounced the current governmental system. From the start, the delegates were deadlocked over the issue of voting. Traditionally, each estate had met and voted separately. Each group had 1 vote. Under this system, the first and second estates always outvoted the Third Estate 2-1. This time, the Third Estate wanted all 3 estates to meet in a single body, with votes counted by head. After a week of stalemate, delegates of the Third Estate took a daring step. In June 1789, claiming to represent the people of France, they declared themselves to be the National Assembly. Despite widespread discord and often conflicting objectives, eventually a new democratic government was formed and a new constitution was drafted and ratified. The Constitution of 1791 set up a limited power in place of the absolute monarchy that had ruled France for centuries. Reflecting Enlightenment goals, it ensured equality before the law for all citizens and ended church interference in government. At the same time, it put power in the hands of men with the means and leisure to serve in the government. The social, economic, and political issues had led for the French Revolution to occur. It addressed and changed the way society was formed. The French Revolution brought about great changes in the society and government of France. Although it failed to achieve all of its goals and at times degenerated into a chaotic bloodbath, the movement played a critical role in shaping modern nations by showing the world the power inherent in the will of the people. It challenged the order of things and the revolutionary state of mind in France.